ceremony needs a celebrity, a VIP guest, and I did actually bump into one earlier on.
Ooh.
And continuing with the transport theme, it was the US Transport Secretary and former presidential hopeful Pete Goodg. Secretary Pete, I mean, I'm still thinking of you as Mayor Pete.
I get that a lot, and I'll happily answer to it. I think once a mayor, always a mayor.
Oh, you can have both at the same time.
I don't see why not.
So we'll talk. There's so many things we could talk about. First of all, have you seen the draft of the COP agreement that was released this morning?
I've not.
Just in the summer.
Yeah, we've been going from event to event. So, I gather that's coming together. Our focus today has been on the maritime and the aviation sector, some of the hardest to abate. Everybody knows what an electric car looks like. Nobody's seen an electric airliner, but we took some real concrete steps today that I think are going to make a big difference.
Oh, tell us about some of them then.
Well, on the maritime side, we're establishing green shipping corridors. The Clydebank Declaration has brought together a number of countries, including the United States, which is proud to be part of it, to start pioneering these technologies that we know we've got to move toward. Pound for pound, maritime shipping is actually one of the least carbon-intensive ways to move something, but there's so much of it, and the ships burn such dirty fuel oil that it's actually one of the biggest areas that we've got to fix. Then you get to the aviation sector, where clearly novel propulsion technologies will have to be the solution for the long term so that they can truly be zero emission. But also, in order for us to meet our goals, we can't wait for that. That's why the commitments today around sustainable aviation fuels that are part of the international declaration and a U.S. declaration of our own policy committing ourselves to net zero by 2050 in the sector, I think are going to be a very big part of the solution.
So sustainable aviation is a very easy thing to say, really hard to achieve. What are some of your ideas for how we'll get there? Is it fuels from different sources? Is it a different kind of powering a plane altogether? I mean, you raised the idea of an electric plane.
That's right. So in the nearer term, there are fuels that can go into existing planes using existing engines, but that have dramatically different life cycle carbon emissions. That's what we mean when we talk about SAF, or sustainable aviation fuel. Now, right now, a tiny, tiny proportion of fuel is prepared on these terms, but we're going to be working with the private sector to try to kickstart some market-making moves to create more of a market so that you get those economies of scale that drive down the cost so that increasingly is the right option. But again, that's to get us through the short, medium term. In the long run, we do have to come up with new means of propulsion, and there are some really compelling technologies that are being developed toward that end.
One of the other things that's happened here today is this pledge about going diesel and petrol free for cars and vans. The United States hasn't signed that pledge. Why not?
So the United States made a very ambitious move to get 50% of our sales to be zero emission by 2030. The president led that, and we brought together not only our auto industry, but labor in order to commit to that. That's our focus, and we really want to emphasize that, but we welcome the action that's going on here and the international coordination and collaboration as each country finds its way toward that zero carbon surface transportation as well.
Because I, as a journalist covering that story, would say, oh, the US is very proud of its car industry. They haven't signed up to this pledge. That's a bad thing. You would argue that's the wrong interpretation.
No, I mean, look, we're very proud of the acceleration of EV adoption that's going on, especially because in the US, we're seeing both the newer companies, the startups, and some of the most traditional automakers signing on to this together. Of course, we got to keep pushing, and we got to go further. But this 2030 goal is both very ambitious and, we believe, achievable.
So this week, the $1 trillion, I still can't believe I'm saying the word trillion, the infrastructure package that President Biden's been steering through Congress, and it's been quite a tricky journey. How much of that trillion do you, as Transport Secretary, get to spend?
So we have about $660 billion worth of investments ahead that we have got to make responsibly, efficiently, and as swiftly as we can. That includes over $100 billion in new funding for roads and bridges, but also the biggest investment in public transit that the U.S. has ever made at a federal level. Which, as far as I'm concerned, is as much a matter of climate policy as it is transportation policy, because no matter how many electric vehicles we make and drive, we got to give people alternatives to having a vehicle or using a vehicle at all. And people only have those alternatives where there are robust and strong public transit systems.
Comparing climate change with COVID, which people do as a sort of generational challenge thing, watching the United States, you can see the culture war playing out on people's faces with masks, right? If you're a certain kind of person, you wear a mask. If you're a certain kind of person, you don't. Is it the same with climate change in your experience, that you your political philosophy defines how you see the issue?
It can be, but we've got to move past that. Climate change, we can't afford for it to be a partisan issue. And what I want to see is a robust debate, as you have in a lot of other countries, between the left and the right on how to quickly solve it, rather than debating whether to solve it at all. I want to make sure that anybody in the U.S., including people in conservative areas, areas, industrial workers, rural families, view themselves as part of the solution, which means we have to make sure that's actually true. But the business and economic opportunities in confronting climate change, I think the recognition of that, and you can see it here in Glasgow with all of the participation of the business community, I think demonstrates that the old framework of climate versus jobs is a false one. And there's so much opportunity here that no matter your ideology, no matter your cultural background, it makes no sense to deny the reality of the challenge and the importance of the solutions.
But can you give us any evidence that those political, philosophical things are changing?
Sure. I mean, one piece of evidence is the fact that we did see bipartisan cooperation on the infrastructure deal, which included support for electric vehicle chargers. It included support for port electrification and other means. But clearly, we've got to go further, right? I mean, I want to see the Green Republican deal and watch that compete with Democratic ideas on how to do this. Because again, this can't be a partisan issue. There's not enough time.
Now, one of the lasting images of President Biden when he was here, I'm sorry to say this, last week, was him in the plenary of the COP with his eyes shut. Some people say thinking, some people say meditating, other people say asleep. I mean, which one was it? And does he do that in meetings with you?
Well, let me tell you, he's one of the most energetic people I've ever dealt with, and that goes all the way back to the campaign, which was, it was definitely draining for me as somebody in my 30s. And every time I saw him, he had a spring in his step. And in particular, you can see how energized he is by the major progress that we've made in Congress with the first half of what I call the big deal, the first half of his economic agenda. I think that momentum is going to carry us into the second.
I mean, does he sit there sometimes with his eyes shut, sort of thinking about things?
Look, he's somebody who takes it in. He listens more than I think people realize because he's a very gregarious person, but he also really cares what you have to say. But he's also just somebody who I think has a lot of passion about meeting this moment. I'm not sure anybody watching this administration arrive would have given it the credit or the anticipation of the level of ambition, the level of urgency that he has brought to this. And I can tell you that rolls downhill. He makes it very clear to cabinet members like me the expectation he has for us to act swiftly, for us to act responsibly, for us to do a good job. And he demonstrated that in part by deploying so many of us to be here in Glasgow.
Yeah, there are a lot of American accents here. Do you have a prepared line about your own political future and 2024?
Nope.
Oh, well, that's refreshing. So you don't get into the speculation at all.
I mean, look, we've got the biggest job ever presented to a Department of Transportation on my plate right now, and I know that the most important thing I can do is to do right by the president, who has very high expectations, and the public, who are trusting us with an enormous sum of money to get big results. That's 100% of my time and attention right now.
On a personal level, we heard that your son was in hospital recently. How's he doing, and what was that process like, having a sick child while being mega in the public eye?
Yeah, I mean, parenting, I think, is part joy and part terror for any parent. And sadly, we experienced that with the hospitalization of both our kids, one very severely. But I'm pleased to say they're both at home. They're both doing great. And we're just so thankful for not just the medical care they got, but the support that we got.
And you've now started a bit of a debate back in the US about what time off parents should be entitled to.
Yeah, and I know this is kind of unique to the US and most parts of the world. It's
yeah, we kind of have that already here. Yeah.
Leave. So look, I mean, a couple of things I think are important to understand. First of all, parenting is work. I am accustomed to very hard work and long hours, but I've never seen a job as demanding as taking care of newborn infants. That's number one. Number two, of course, with a job like mine, I still had to be engaged throughout in a lot of different ways. And many working parents go through this. My version of it might have been a little bit different. Calling a member of the Senate from a hospital room and hoping they wouldn't hear the beeping, or setting a Zoom background so nobody would know where I was, and then dashing back into the room to alternating. But that might have been unique to my experience. But so many families have to balance how to take care of business and how to take care of their loved ones. And what we're trying to do as a policy agenda with Build Back Better is to make that balance a little bit easier. Support in-home care, support childcare, support parenting. That is as pro-family as it gets. And I'm proud to be part of an administration that understands that.
And just on a practical level with your daily life, I'm imagining you get like a motorcade and a lot more helicopters these days. Does that mean as a transportation secretary, you don't get a real view of what transportation is like on the ground anymore? I mean, you're not going to be getting a bus anymore, are you?
Well, I might do. I mean, it's not like I'm the president, right? And so I try to, as a mayor, I was very accustomed to eating what I cooked because I was a resident as well as the mayor. And it's true, there's a bit more of an apparatus around me now as a cabinet member, but I still try to make sure I really have a feel for what's going on, whether it's jumping on a bike and seeing how the bike lanes are, getting to work, or trying to make sure I'm experiencing the transit that we're seeking at a policy level to support.
And also, I have to say, this is my hometown. It's pronounced Glasgow.
I'm sorry. I know it's an American thing. We're trying to get it right. It's just a habit because I think we've heard it both ways.
Go on, give it a go. Try and get it right.
Glasgow.
That was pretty good, actually. Glasgow. So basically, just don't think of the W at the end. Imagine it's just the verb to go. Yeah. Glasgow.
Glasgow. Got it. I even had haggis for breakfast. I had a full Scottish, so I'm.
Did you?
I'm trying to live into it. Now I got to get my hands on. Here's a question though.
Yeah.
Is a Scotch egg Scottish?
Debatable. I mean, I grew up in Scotland and it wasn't a big deal here. It's much more of a big deal in England, I'd say. Yeah. We have a thing called a Scotch pie, though, which is a kind of mutton pie that's very Scottish. Oh. We also have, if you're having a Scottish breakfast, there's a kind of sausage that's actually a square, flat sausage called a Lorne sausage.
Yes.
Did you have that? Maybe?
Had that when I was a student. The BHS, I think you could pick 9 for just over £2. That was a very important part of my life, and I think I encountered that kind of sausage then.
And how long were you being at COP for?
Not long. Got to get back to the States and get to work on this bill. So today's going to be an action-packed day, and I'm heading back tomorrow on an aircraft that I trust will be full of folks from the UK headed home. I mean, just seeing these images of people being reunited at our airports. I mean, it's like Love Actually over there.
Totally. And Richard Curtis was on our program recently. Why did it take so long?
Well, look, this was something we took very seriously. We're talking about a pandemic that has killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, and as you might expect, took a cautious approach, but also an approach with a lot of engagement with our UK partners, European partners, and others. And I'm just so glad we've been able to get to this point. Moving from a country-based to a passenger-based framework, I think is smart, it's rational, and it allows us finally to have these scenes of people being reunited after so long.
Yeah, we had a couple on the other day there they'd had 5 cancelled trips to Walt Disney World, and they called us from JFK as they were about to get their connecting flight. They were very excited.
Oh, well, I'm glad they made it that far, and hopefully they have a great vacation. And look, obviously this is big business for us as a country as well, but most of all for people who are getting back to loved ones they haven't been able to see in a long time. We're so relieved that we've been able to take this step.
Well, great to meet you, and I'll go and check out the public transport in South Bend.
Sounds good.
When I get the chance. Thank you very much.